Hello, folks. As promised, back at you with a little special video today. I'm going to spotlight 10 of my favorite Grateful Dead live shows. This video was sort of inspired by Kevin, Dr. Strangely Strange. If you don't know who he is, go check him out. The He had mentioned in one of his previous videos sort of about navigating the live Grateful Dead, which it can be very tedious. You kind of have to break it into eras. So I'm going to try to keep this very quick. So get your pencils and paper ready, and I'll list off some of mine. These are going to be in chronological order, not in my top 10, 10 to 1. I might even do 11 here now that I'm looking at this. I brought my index cards, so I have, of course, my huge list I started with, and I'm gonna give you some of my favorites here, and I'll kind of explain some of them. So, one thing I will mention is usually if there's a commercial release with these, I'd say it's usually worth seeking out maybe the shows that preceded it, and then also the ones that came after it. Normally, if you get them in a pretty tight space, and you'll notice too, like for instance. One of the time frames that I'm going to mention, there's about 25 shows that were called to create these two particular releases from the Grateful Dead. So a lot of times it's if you like a specific era of them or you like what you're hearing, it's usually worth just kind of, like I said, checking out some of the ones that are within maybe a couple of days. Because you sort of get the same thing. So I'm going to start all the way back July 3rd, 1966. It's a show that was in San Francisco. I will describe this sort of as the primal Grateful Dead. Soon after, there was the Record Store Day release that just came out this year, the July 29th or July 30th, 1966. You sort of get the same thing. The Grateful Dead, they're still kind of working out their tunes. So it's really cool to sort of listen to this one and then listen to the one that came out for Record Store Day, and you can kind of hear how they're sort of working through the tunes. I would kind of describe this as sort of the, like a garage rock Grateful Dead. The organ is just so high up in the mix and stuff like that, the little farfisa or whatever those things are called. So, this is long before their self-titled. The self-titled didn't get recorded until January of '67. So still a little ways to go. But they've tunes like Minglewood and Sitting on Top of the World and Viola Lee Blues. So they're starting to work out those long kind of the jams and stuff like that. So that'll be number one. Number two, I'm gonna go with. February 7th, 1969. This is actually the first time the Grateful Dead played Pittsburgh. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, of course. How long was it going to take me to say something about it? So the funny thing about this is there's an early show and there's a late show. This show is actually kind of interesting to note that they also played with the Fugs and the Velvet Underground for these particular shows. There was one show, I'm sorry. The early show basically starts with Dark Star, 14-minute version of Dark Star. The second set, there's a China Cat teaser going into Alligator. It really goes nowhere. I guess one thing that's kind of cool about this is, obviously not only is it, well worth noting that it's the first time that they played, but about 2 weeks later, so the end of February 27th through March 2nd, they record sort of the material that goes on Live Dead. So you're kind of hearing them still kind of working out some of those tunes, and they kind of evolve a little bit before they hit the album. If you're kind of interested in that era too, this is it's a compilation, sort of kind of outtakes and what have you from the Fillmore West, which this basically became. Where the recordings for Live Dead were from. So again, that's not a commercial release. That's something that only exists on the internet and archive.org. So worth seeking out. So a year later, we're going to move to February 11th, 1970. So this is actually part of a run that was documented in Bear's Choice, Volume 1. There was no Volume 2. And also Dave's Picks. I want to say Dave's Picks number 4. Yes, Dave's Picks number 4, which was covered the 13th and the 14th of February. But what's incredible about February 11th is it has members of Fleetwood Mac and the Allman Brothers. They come on and they do they play what's called Spanish Jam, and it goes into Turn On Your Love Light. It's an incredible show. It's just absolutely there's not a bad tune on it. But when the Allman Brothers and Fleetwood Mac are out there, with Peter Green's out there, it is hot. Like, it is a hot show, and I think I think they went on in some of those. I don't know if it was that particular day, but they went on and played till like maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And Phil Lesh wrote about how sort of the door opens up and it's just early morning in New York and the snow is coming down, and he's just like, this is it. This is what it's all about. So excellent one. This is prior to Working Man's Dead. Working Man's Dead was recorded I think in March of 1970. So moving on, we're going to move to May 2nd of 1970. Now, there's also another show that's the day before this at the same place, Harper College. This is on Dick's Picks number 8. So you have basically Jerry Garcia sort of working overtime here. They open with New Riders of the Purple Sage. Jerry played pedal steel for New Riders, and then they did an acoustic set, and then they would do an electric set. So if you're kind of into that, the American Beauty, Working Man's Dead kind of era stuff, definitely check out that show. It is very good. And Working Man's Dead came out, I believe, in June, and then American Beauty came out in November. So they're still kind of working out some of those tunes. So moving on from there, I'm going to pop over to, we're going to jump ahead to 1972. Now, keep in mind, there's some great stuff in between. I'm not sort of dismissing that entire year. 1971, you get a lot of the Skull and Roses kind of stuff. So, the summer of 71, there's a lot of, if you like that sort of era, Bertha and Brown Eyed Women, those particular tunes. Check out that time frame. But moving on to March 26, 1972, this was commercially released as Dave's Picks number 14. So basically, the Grateful Dead do, this is prior to Europe 72. They have I think it's about a 7-night run at the Academy of Music in New York. And that show basically is sort of, I think, show number 5 of 7. But these are all really just, they're pre-Europe 72. They just have they're really just putting their chops together, and they're definitely hot at that point. You hear some really good, some very good playing. Jerry starts doing the And We Bid You Good Night during the Not Fade Away jam at the end. So, of course, going on from those shows, I think they played a couple of dates in New York. The reason they did that was just because they were, raising capital basically before they went to Europe for a month. So, you basically, those shows were played, and then a week later they were, in England. And again, I'm not dismissing any of Europe 72. It's definitely great as well too. Sort of the middle part, I think around April 15th and 16th, there's some great shows. See what I'm doing? I'm sneaking these in here, and they're not part of my top 10, but whatever. Just jot them down. Moving on from there, I'm going to talk about, this of course is probably one of the most quintessential shows. I would say up there with the Cornell show, probably, I wasn't going to do that, but I was going to talk about the top of the top. But this is the better known as now Sunshine Daydream. It was a commercial release, August 27th, 1972. An amazing show. They are totally on for this one. It was sort of done in support to raise money for I think a dairy that Ken Kesey either owned or was partnered with, but most noted for being the live album that turned Sam onto the live Grateful Dead. I basically had that CD in the car, and that was the only CD that was in there, and it was a nice sunny day, and she put on some music, and The rest, as they say, is history. So 8/27/72. So from there, we're going to move to September 11th. September 11th, September 12th of 1973. These are both shows are at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, in Williamsburg, Virginia. These are fun shows because it's sort of known as the September Horn Tour, and they toured with this guy right here, Doug Sham, and his band, that are known as the Sir Doug Quintet, and you're playing with one Robert Zimmerman at the time. You can see them right there. Doug basically is, their band is opening for the Grateful Dead. Two of the members that are playing the horns, later went on and did stuff, Legion of Mary with Jerry Garcia. Any basically tunes from that era, especially that, September, Wake of the Flood's coming out. So there's a lot of like Let It Grow basically is the tune at that point. But those ones are most noted because they basically have horns. The band would sit in with the Grateful Dead during the second set. So again, kind of something that you don't have happen that often with the Grateful Dead. I know that they had some people sit in with them in 1969, like a flute player for a little bit. I think maybe one or two shows, but that's not something you had a lot of people sitting in with the Grateful Dead. Moving on from there, we're gonna do a pretty big jump, and we're gonna jump to 1977. I will say, and I'm not going to say that because I keep breaking my own rules. But of course, you got to go with the 5/8/77. The Cornell show, most notably known as the quintessential Grateful Dead show. It's just a really good show. I think it's kind of what. If you could define the Grateful Dead in one show, it would be that particular show. You're sort of getting, they're working out the Terrapin stuff. Terrapin, I think, came out in, I want to say July, so maybe 2 months later. Yeah, there's definitely some good tunes on that. The next day is the one where they actually play Terrapin, not for the first time, but my brother basically was like, "Oh, Cornell. There's no Terrapin," but there was the next night. So now that it's commercially available, go get it. It's fantastic. So from 1977, I'm going to go ahead and move to. This is sort of what I was talking about earlier with sort of, you have this big group of shows. It's hard to kind of pick one. Let me just see if I have one that I narrowed it down to one particular show. Let's just go with we'll go with 9/29/80. So any show from 9/25 to October 31st of 1980, all those shows were used either for the Reckoning album or for the Dead Set one. In my opinion, I feel like that should be the next big box set. There's not a lot of really good quality recordings of those. From what I've read, that they were pretty strict on allowing people to bring in audio equipment because they filmed the Dead Ahead video at Radio City, and of course the albums that they were recording. So it was kind of like the first time that they sort of kind of cracked down on people bringing in recordings, basically. So any show within that 25 run, it's the Warfield, and then also New York Radio City Music Hall. Just fantastic. They're just, you have your acoustic set and you have your electric set. So if you like really the Working Man's Dead and the American Beauty kind of era, those are some great shows to kind of listen to some latter Dead, and they kind of sneak you into sort of the end era. Some of those, again, some commercially available, some not. I will bounce back to 1973 and say that was not commercially available. I don't know if I said that or not. From 1980, I know we're going to jump ahead a little bit more. Of course, between that, you have Dylan and the Dead. There's a lot of stuff that, to pick from. You know, Jerry definitely bounces back after, you know, being in his diabetic coma and things like that. So there's some great shows in '87. But I'm going to jump right to October 9th, 1989, which is at the Hampton Coliseum, released as formerly the Warlocks. I guess what's notable about this, just a hot show. And it's the first Dark Star that they did in 5 years. So, as stereotypical as that sounds, that's actually pretty cool when you think about it. You know that they went such a long time before um, they played anything. And then the last one of that show, you know, again, I know this is a commercial release, but it is sort of a good sort of point of entry, especially if you're going to look at that, you know, that downhill from here sort of era of the Grateful Dead. So March 29th, 1990, and of course released as Wake of the Flood. Wake Up to Find Out, the Nassau Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. This was also released sort of a few different times. So the Spring 90 box sets, the Spring 90 era is definitely really cool because you had a lot of unique songs. So you have basically songs that were, when you look at an artist, like, so let's just take, for instance, Paul McCartney. If you were to go see Paul McCartney right now, wherever he's playing, and then you would get tickets for one place, and then you'd see him a couple days later in another location. Pretty much 98% of his show is going to be exactly the same. He may play one or two special songs that are, you know, one here, one here. In that Spring 1990, you know, there's something like, you know, they played, I think, somewhere around the neighborhood of maybe like 18 to 20 shows. And you had like 120 unique songs. So you had some songs that they would only play once throughout the entire tour. So it's really just awesome to kind of hear that kind of stuff. So a cool way to sort of you know, get some of those is this is a compilation that came out, The Grateful Dead, So Glad You Made It, Spring 1990. Rather than buying the actual box set, I mean, if you can, you know, find it online or whatever the case may be. This is sort of a nice, sort of concise sort of collection of some of those tunes. This, of course, is the complete show, which is also released for the Record Store Day on vinyl. And if you say, hey, you know, I want more of that 1990. Of course, this was released as well, which was the Grateful Dead Without a Net. This exists on vinyl too. But again, same kind of, you know, from the same era. I think some of the stuff was recorded in '89, but most of it was from that, you know, the Spring 1990 set. So there you go. How'd I do? Good. About, you know, a little over 15 minutes. But, you know, leave me a comment below if you want to discuss these. Maybe we can talk about some more in detail. So thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you on the trail.